Hello? In the back? Oh, they're waving. That's a good sign, they're waving. We'll try this. Oh, it's quiet now. Anyway, I want to thank you for many, obviously many of you traveled many miles, spanning the entire globe from pole to pole. I know we have representatives here from North Pole, Alaska, I believe, and people from all the way as far south as South Africa. So we really are pole to pole here, and very much an international group of celebrants here to celebrate one thing, and one person, and his obviously his family who supported him through all the years. So with that being said, obviously welcoming you all, which I believe there's close to 500 here this evening, to the Lotus Festival 95. This afternoon, just to briefly make a few kind of quick overview, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of over 200 cars on the Lotus Parade. Thank you, everyone. Well done. We're going to try to count cars in Doug Chadwick's picture, but I'm afraid we're going to have a difficulty even doing that because there are 233 cars in the photograph. Add that to the approximately somewhere about 130 to 140 race cars, Lotus race cars in the paddock and in the pits and on the racetrack today, and we begin to understand the magnitude of what all of you have put together, because it's without you and your presence and your travels, this wouldn't have happened. I'm not going to talk a whole bunch here because we have a lot to do, so I want to introduce our co-chairman, Mike Ostrov. And Mike, where are you? I know you were sitting in the back. You got to come up here.
Well, some of you have asked what this small button says on here, and it says really something very simple: stop me before I volunteer again. But there's nothing more exciting than seeing 500 Lotus enthusiasts all under one roof. I've talked with probably all of you in the last 6 or 7 months by phone or by fax or by letter or in person, and it's an incredible group of people. But some of those, and I'm sorry, David, we just knocked your microphone over. Some of this got started 40 years ago, and it all really got started in a little back lockup with a 25-pound loan from Hazel Chapman, please. A very spirited and very fast driver in her own right. Thank you. Now, in addition to that, carrying on the tradition is Clive Chapman, Managing Director of Classic Team Lotus. You've seen a number of his cars here today. I was fortunate enough to spend some time with him last April, and the collection of Formula One cars, the historic memorabilia and the parts, this is something that will continue on for many years. Clive, with our thanks. The The rest of the introductions are going to be sort of the supporting cast, and without these folks and individuals and groups of people, we all wouldn't be here. For whatever reason we are here, we thank you all. Patrick Peel is head of group communications, Lotus Cars Limited. We have Jim Blackwell in charge of Lotus Cars USA in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Jim's here. And they've all brought their staff, because without their staff, this wouldn't happen. So a thanks to the entire staff from the UK side, the USA side. Thank you all. A couple of special people that we obviously should introduce tonight. You'll hear them later on. We have Jay Chamberlain sitting in the corner. Jay, please stand up for a second. It's been a long time since many of you have seen Jay. And you'll hear from Jay later on in the evening. He's kind of the father confessor of Lotus in the United States. He started it all, or he was on the receiving end. You can tell the story. In addition, we have both Susie and Stirling Moss. Again, Stirling, please, if you'd stand up. Thank you. And you'll hear from Stirling later on in the evening, and this may go on. We have to be out of here by 2:30. I'm sorry, Stirling, you know, that's a cutoff time. All right, that's all the welcoming. We're going to keep this thing on a real tight timetable. Dan Wardman, president of the Golden Gate Lotus Club, will commence with the rest of the major activities. Dan, where are you? Dan?
Thanks, Mike, and good to see you all out there tonight. The first thing I'll be doing this evening is giving out the awards for the Concourse. We had a lot of contention, a lot of voting went on. I think there was some block voting going on. Just a guess. And what I want to do for this is, rather than have everyone come up, we have all the awards over on the side table. And if you would just stand up when I call out your name, we'll recognize you now, and at the end of the evening, you can pick up your awards and have your picture taken, we hope, with Stirling Moss. At least that's what they told me to say, Stirling. Okay, so the first award is for the Best Europa S1, S2. That goes to a nice 1971 red Europa belonging to Lori Hope of Ogden, Utah. Lori, are you out there? Where's Lori? Is she out there? There she is. Okay, terrific. The next award is for the Lotus Europa Twin Cam, and we have a quite wild one that got this award, belonging to Bill Inskeep of Glendale, California. Bill, you with us? Where's Bill? Okay. The next one is for the Best Elite Eclat. That car came to us from Colorado, belonging to Vic Cooper. Vic, where are you? The Best Esprit S2, S1, S2 is a local boy from Menlo Park, a Golden Gate Club member, John Zender. John? Another quite local person won the Esprit Turbo, Best Esprit Turbo, and that's Peter Townsend from Aptos. The Best New Esprit Award goes to a car that I would very much like to drive home, however I can't. It belongs to Craig Stevens from San Diego. It's a Jim Clark Special. And the Best New Elan goes to Jess Marker, who drove that down from Washington. Now, we had 2 awards for Best Lotus Race Car, and unfortunately, we weren't able to get many of the Lotus race cars into the corral area, but a few of you knew about which ones were out there in the paddock. So the Best Lotus Race Car Open Wheel division goes to Kiyoshi Hamai. And the Best GT, now this is a bit of a stretch because this particular GT has only about 3 Lotus parts left on it, but it is the car that belongs to Barry Spencer, that wild red, white, and blue thing. The Best Elite, and this was a very hard choice to make. There's certainly a lot of wonderful elites that were out in the lot today, but the Best Elite got voted R. Bruce McDonald from Escondido. Another hot contest was for Best 7, and the Best 7 came to us from Placentia, California, Lloyd Faust. Another one that was probably the most hotly contested was the Best Elan, Best Original Elan, and that car, number 342, belonged to Paul Johnson. The Best Elan Plus 2 was a 1967 car, not many of those in the United States. I had one when I lived in the UK and couldn't get it back here. And that went to Richard Shelter from Richfield, Minnesota. Is he out there? He's out there somewhere. The Best Cortina, we had quite a few Cortinas out there, went to Connie Clintare, or Clintar, from Thousand Oaks. And the most coveted award, the one that we all strive to achieve, is of course the Best Stress Crack. And I have to say, I'm very happy to say one of our Golden Gate Lotus Club guys brought home the trophy once again. Best Stress Crack by a landslide was John Rosner for his 1972 Lotus Europa. Now, we had a bit of a foul up with the trivia contest. There was too much delegation. Mike Ostrov delegated putting together a trivia contest to me, and I guess I must have delegated to him because we both did it. So there were 2 trivia contests, and there were only 5 people who actually handed in trivia contest answers. Now I thought my trivia contest was pretty easy, and the people who filled it in did pretty well on it. But I looked at Mike's, and it was very intimidating. There were 2 people who went through both of them, and they must have gotten their books out because they did extremely well. And we have a plaque for both of those people. First from Toronto, Mike Smith. Mike here. And second, actually there's no placing intended here, but the second name I have is John Rumsey. I don't know where John hails from. So that concludes the Concourse Awards. Now, as a fake Lotus 11 owner, I have the red Westfield 11 you've seen in the parking lot today. It's a special pleasure for me. I've always admired those cars and was able to get one that was close to the right thing, not quite the right thing, of course, and to be able to introduce our first guest speaker of the evening, Jay Chamberlain. For those of you who have had a chance to look around in some of the posters we have here and in the program, you'll know that Jay Chamberlain really was Lotus in the USA in the early days. He was the distributor for the West Coast and became the distributor for all of the United States, I understand, and was a terrific racing driver as well, having won the 1100cc class at Le Mans in 1957 with McKay Frazier. So we're real glad to have Jay here to speak with us tonight. Also glad to see him racing again. I understand he races a Lotus Type 14 in vintage events. So Jay, could you please come up and speak for us tonight?
Well, it's quite a night for me. There's a lot of good friends here, some I haven't seen for a long time. I thought a lot about this. I wasn't sure just what to do. And with Stirling following me, I thought, oh God, here it is. Stirling's here. I'm in trouble again. And watching him today, he hasn't lost any form at all. He really went fast. I'm proud of him. Anyway, I just didn't know how to approach it. I didn't know whether to start out in the early days or start out in the middle or start out at the end. I thought I'd just wander here for a few minutes with the beginning. In the early 50s, very early 50s, I was in business in Burbank, California in a speed shop. We specialized in putting Cadillac engines in Fords. At that time, a flathead Ford didn't go too quick, so you could put a Cadillac engine in it and it would fly, and then you couldn't stop it. So we made a business out of it. We enlarged the brakes and put a Cad engine in it and tweaked it up here and there and put some roll bars and made it work. And in the evenings, I ran midgets all over the United States, mostly in Southern California, and was quite successful. Got on my head a lot. That's why I don't talk too loud, I guess. But outside of that, one day, a man named George Buchanan came to my store, or the shop, and he said, I've got a car that we bought in England when we were there, and we can't find anybody to really do anything with it. I said, what do you do with it? What is it? And he said, it's a Lotus. I said, a Lotus? What is that? He said, well, it's a little bitty car that they make in England that goes quite fast. So I thought, well, we'll look at it anyway. So George got the car there with somebody else's borrowed trailer and a few things. And here was this cute little car. And I lost my heart right there. The lines were good, and the engine was quick, and the power-to-weight ratio was right, and for the period that it came out, it was the quickest and the best handling car around at that time. George and I went to Sebring with the car, and I was to be the mechanic, and George was going to be the driver with a stockbroker buddy of his. They dropped the flag and away they went, and they went off the end of the road the first time and, crashed and bumped. And I thought, well, we better do something about this car to make it work for George. So we got his wife to drive the car, and she did quite well. So we campaigned the 9 for the rest of the season. And there was a few 7s around, not really 7s, early cars. Bicycle fenders and all of that, and I thought, boy, we're really vintage here. We took the car and ran it hard, and it just went like a freight train and finished everything. We then turned around and I ordered a Mark 9 for myself, and I talked to Colin on the phone and wanted all the tweaks that were available, and he said there are none. We just bolt the car together, and that's it, and that's exactly what it was. It was a pretty thing, and it was light, and as I said before, the power-to-weight ratio was right. It got around a corner where those old Ford Cadillacs wouldn't get around the corner. So we got my car and campaigned that the rest of the year. And then at Sebring, I was invited to come with another company. And at Sebring, I met Colin Chapman, and he had drawings of his 11 and some pictures of the first 11s. I guess it was the first 11s. And I thought, boy, we have to have one of those. So I took the 9 and campaigned it for a while, and then an 11 came, and with the 11 came me going to Europe. And you have to know me at that time. I was pretty rough and pretty crude, boy. Hazel will go along with that. I wasn't a polite Englishman. I was just kind of a racer. We took the 11 and campaigned that 11 and did really well with it. Colin invited me to drive with them at Sebring in '57, and the results of that weekend was really good. We did. Colin won at just about everything in the small displacement class with us. There was myself and McKay Fraser, who was another American living in Europe racing, and there was Keith Hall and Clifford Allison in the small displacement car, and we won, I guess, the index of performance, or the group did, with Clifford and Keith Hall.
You may have to raise your voice a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then there was myself and Mac, and there was several private owners with cars. Alan Stacy and a kid, Keith Green. Anyway, they were bumped because we broke the 1500 engine. We then turned around, and after Le Mans and our success, we figured we were unbeatable. We figured if in the small displacement world we had it all cooked. So we ran one or two small races, and we went to Reims, and that was our disaster. We lost Mac. I ended up in the hospital. Clifford ended up in jail, and he was trying to get to the hospital in a hurry, and he ran over a bicycle guy, and boy, that was where it went. So I came back to the United States and licked my wounds and trying to put things back together. Colin had a lot of work to do to get his cars back to where they should be, and I returned again, and Colin, of course, in the meantime says, "Jay, you can't drive for me anymore. You're a menace." He said, "You've got one of those hearts that breaks." And I didn't know what he meant at first. I thought, wow, what does all this mean? What he meant was I was an accident looking for a place to happen. And in that kind of mode that I was in, it took a few bumps and scars and things like that to kind of slow myself down and know myself as a driver. So we did that. And then there was the elite started to appear in England at the factory, and I went over for the London Auto Show, and there was an elite on the display there. And oh boy, as all of you know, the elite was just outstanding at that time, and the only thing is it wasn't finished. And they worked their buns off, and we practiced a little bit in the car and drove it on the highway and all of that, and the rest is kind of known. I asked Colin if I could sell them, and really I just kind of wanted to sell them out of Burbank, and he needed help all over. So not knowing just exactly how to go about this, I just threw my hat in the ring and started trying to be a salesperson, a race driver, and a family person. And it all crashed in a big way, and I don't think I have to elaborate on that. I think everybody's got an opinion of their side of the picture at that time. And of course, then today it's 1995, and one of the biggest thrills, I said a little earlier, was was meeting Hazel for this. I hadn't seen Hazel since 1962, so that was a big deal for me. And she was friendly to me. That was the big thing. And I love her for it. I'm going to turn this over to Stirling. He's a lot quicker than I am.
Thank you very much, Jay. The next item on our agenda tonight is to get Charlie Rockwell up here. Is Charlie out there in the audience? I hope so. Here he comes. And Charlie's going to give out a few more awards.
Ha! For my first award right here in my pocket. Traveler's checks. Hey, can't go wrong. Somewhere in here. I had one too. Thought I snuck in, huh? Where is that list? It had down here. Wasn't I supposed to do something like the best breakdown or something on a Lotus? That was part of the list. I can't find anything in here. Yeah. Okay, we need the best breakdown story. You got about 30 seconds to think about it. Who has the best breakdown story out of here? There's a real competition for this. I think I won it once, one time a while back. You know, my first date with my wife was to go out and see our Lotus. Of course, she couldn't drive a stick, so she had to push it. We got married anyway, a couple years later. How many good breakdown stories are there here?
My alarm broke down May 27th, 1983, and I haven't driven it since.
Yeah, this is it. This is where you give them.
All right. I came here to Sears Point 3 years ago. Got my clat working pretty nice. Drove all the way up. Of course, it's working fine. Just get to the track. It starts pouring water out of the water pump. Great. Can't go out on the track. You know, I'm really disappointed. Take it over to Barry Spencer. He fixed it up just perfectly for me. I'm really happy. Okay, this is my second great Lotus event. Driving it, it's working great all the way here from Sacramento. The gauges all just fall down to 0. So I'm waiting, it's like 100 degrees, and I'm waiting to find some shade before I pull over, because the engine's fine. So I drive for 20 more miles, the gauges just pop back up. So, great, whatever. The car, driving around here in Monterey, the gauges are working great, good. The thing is happy, it fixed itself. Last night after the banquet, 11:30 at night, my good buddy Richie Longo, one of the sharpest eclat mechanics around, we drive around for 20 minutes through Monterey to try to find the freeway. We wave goodbye. There it is, Richie. We're going the other direction. Goodbye. 20 seconds later, the lights close shut. The lights go off. And I say, well, all right, let me find a parking lot to pull over where there's some lights, because the engine was still working. Pull over into the parking lot where there's lights, and I fiddle with all the wires, like what's going on. And then I try to start it. The engine runs for 4 seconds and turn it off. And I crank it 4 seconds, that's it. So, I don't know. I love Lotuses, but I don't know, I better not say anything.
Well, at the Aston Martin Club, they have a best breakdown story. And John Wire looked out and said, well, is that mechanical or mental breakdowns we're talking about?
Thank you. I'm Joe Dyer. You may have noticed that we always have to have at least one Lotus that gets brought in with a wrecker. So I donated mine today. I had a good time on the track for those 2 laps, and I was able to come down through the corkscrew at good speed. And then I came around, and when I went over the little speed bump coming off of the track between the concrete pillars, the rear suspension fell apart. So I got a wrecker to bring me back down, and then I got to say, Barry Spencer came to my rescue again, and he put it back together for me.
All right, any more comers? We're closing, going once, going up. Oh, it's sold over in that corner over there. Come on up.
Well, mine's not really a breakdown story. Clubbed Lotus Northwest, right? Was going down the freeway just outside of Gilroy. We had about 6 cars in a caravan, and heard this tremendous, I had my Europa on a trailer behind me, and all of a sudden the Europa is trying to pass the motorhome that I'm towing it with. So, got very fortunate, almost had a Europa upside down on a trailer on the freeway. A trailer ball broke at about 70 miles an hour, along with one of the safety chains, and I wish I would have had a video of it because everybody behind me couldn't believe it, that the car stayed on the trailer. At one point in time, it was up on 2 wheels, about ready to go over, and for some miraculous reason, it came back down on the ground and got wedged under the back of the motorhome, and I was able to stop it and repair my hitch and continue on, so there's a... Anyway. After towing it for 800 miles, that was the wildest ride I've ever had without my Europa, believe me.
Okay. Will it be story number 1, story number 2, or story number 3? 3? Number 1? It's number 2? It's 3. It's 3. It takes it. Come on.
Thanks for the entertainment, Charlie. It's a privilege to be up here and be able to introduce our next speaker. Everyone in the room, of course, knows who Stirling Moss is and knows about his achievements. The winner of the first winner in a Grand Prix for Lotus in 1960 at the Monaco Grand Prix in a Lotus 18. Winner of the Mille Miglia in 1955 in the 300 SLR. Winner of the Targa Florio and dozens of Grand Prix. Needs no introduction to anyone in this room, Mr. Stirling Moss.
I would suggest you save your clapping till after. I don't know how I can follow what's gone before. I feel a bit of imposter anyway, actually, to tell you the truth, because I never drove for Colin. Well, that's not quite true. I did a record attempt, actually, but I didn't drive for the factory as such. On that occasion, in the record attempt, of course, he did actually pay me something, so I did, I suppose. But I have raced a lot of Lotuses, or a lot of Loti on quite a few occasions. I think I won, 22 races all told. And my association was one of interest, a lot of enjoyment, and some unhappy times. I think Colin was the most brilliant engineer. The earlier cars, and I mean by that the cars that were before my retirement, which was 62, were delicate but fantastic to drive. Fantastic, not in the way of being easy, because they weren't. I mean, if you take a Lotus 19, I've seen 1 or 2 here, they're not easy cars, but if you know what you're doing, you drive them with precision, they are unbeatable. You take the other cars of the time, things like Cooper Monacos were a lot easier, but they were not as good. They were more fun, but if you met a person who could drive the Lotus and you're in a Cooper, you wouldn't beat it. So he did, I mean, and also Colin, of course, I was connected with him through Vandervelde, because he was asked by Tony Vandervelde to come along and sort his car out so we could get the World Championship, and he did. And he had many innovations. Colin had a good sense of humor in some ways, but not against himself. I probably, I don't know, if, Hazel, if you remember this, but I happened to win in a Lotus at, I think, the American Grand Prix in whenever it was, 60 or something like that. And it was my birthday, and they gave me a birthday cake. And I cut the wheel off to give it to Colin because I thought perhaps it was quite applicable for him. And he didn't think it was funny. But those of us who have driven Lotuses, particularly the older ones, will know that they were inclined to be fragile. I had one of those Elites, a fantastic car. Now, the Elite was a beautiful car. The only trouble was that if you closed the door, it might fall off. But I loved it, actually. It really was a supercar. Now, on occasions like this, what I normally do is talk for a little bit, and then if you have questions and answers, I'll do my best to make up a story if I don't know the answer. But I normally go through and just have a bit of a blurb. And the first thing I'd like to sort of mention is that motor racing has changed a lot since I retired. I retired in 1990. Can everybody hear, by the way? No? Oh, all right. This is this thing, not me. Is that better? Right, okay. I'm glad you didn't hear the earlier bit because it wasn't too nice. No, I was forced into retirement in 1962 because of an accident that I had. I don't know why, whether it was a car or me, I don't know. But I was forced into retirement. Not long after that, they said, Stirling Moss has retired, we can start to pay the money now. Because in 1961, I think I was the highest paid Formula One and sports car driver probably in the world, and my total gross income, taking all the money that I got with sponsorship and start money and everything else, was £32,750 odd, which is about $50,000, which was a very good income. I'm not suggesting it wasn't. And by the time I'd fiddled everything I could, because I had to pay my own expenses, I paid tax on about £8,000, that's $12,000 odd, which again was a very good income. In those days, not even, I mean, it would take a very, very good surgeon to be making that much, and I was enjoying what I was doing, so it wasn't bad, but it has changed. If I was racing today, I don't know quite what I'd be worth, but if it had the same success ratio and I was doing 57 races a year, well, as you probably all know, Michael Schumacher, who is certainly the best, he's just signed up for 3 years with Ferrari for £40 million. That's $60 million, which is a lot of money. Damon has just, I understand, has just got $6.5 million for a year with Williams. I mean, that's quite a lot of money. That's pounds, by the way, so you're talking 10 and 11 million. So times have changed. But in the days that I was racing, I think we had the fun. I mean, the drivers were friendly together. I mean, my first marriage, that was then. On my first marriage, one does get confused, you understand. My first marriage, I had 6 ushers, all of which were racing drivers. Nowadays, I don't think that they'd invite any of the other drivers. And I remember going to my 21st birthday party down at Brands Hatch. And I said, come on, we'll all go to a local place for a tea dance. Because obviously we didn't drink. We had tea and, I suppose, 7-Up and stuff. And there was a real cracker there. And she came up to me and said, I'm your 21st birthday present from Stan Coldham. Now, he was another driver. And this was my birthday present from him. I can't see that happening today unless you've got AIDS. So times have changed. Now, it's difficult for me to say many stories about Lotus because I didn't actually drive for them. I did for Rob. And we had some really quite interesting events. I mean, I consider probably my best races were in '61 at Monaco and Nürburgring when I drove the little Lotus, the square, the square job. I think 18. Yeah, I think it was an 18. I don't know. To us, it was just a Grand Prix car of the year, and if they gave you the ignition key, you'd drive it. But it was a very interesting race from my point of view. I suppose if one can call it interesting to have some bastard breathing down your neck the whole way. But at the start, we went out, and Jim Clark was just starting then. Now, Jim, I reckon, was one of the finest drivers ever in the world, actually. At that time, obviously, he was getting better. Well, that just makes me say one other thing. Of course, Lotus have had fantastic drivers. I mean, Jim Clark, I think Fangio is the greatest driver there's ever been, bar none, and also a great man. But I think you have him right at the top, and then underneath him you have Jim Clark and Ayrton Senna. And I have a very great respect for Ayrton because I think he was a great racer. And there have been many other guys, friends of mine, I mean, in this island and so on. I mean, really great people have driven for Lotus. But I don't want to go off that point, but I was just sort of saying that this was at the Monaco Grand Prix, which was 100 laps in those days, throughout 3 3/4 hours. It was quite a long time around Monaco. And after, I think it was about 8 laps or so, the field started to split. And I was in the sort of second half, and I thought, God, I've got to keep up with the leaders, who I think were the Ferraris and Jim. I can't remember exactly who it was. And anyway, I managed to catch up and take the lead, I think on the 10th lap, and led for 90 laps to the end, and the distance between the other guys was between 2 and 4 seconds, or 2 and 5 seconds, and that isn't far. And I must tell you that it was my proudest moment when they played God Save the Queen at the end, and that was driving a Lotus, and that means an awful lot to me. But talking about racing automatically obviously has to bring me to Mercedes. Mercedes in the day when I raced for them, was 1955, were the best team. I mean, they were the Williams, or whatever you consider as the best now, of that time. I remember once going around Monza, and the windscreen bloke with a windscreen on the this was a Streamline, one of the Streamline 196s, was just a little piece of perspex, but very important, like a bug deflector, and you couldn't see without this thing, and mine broke, and so I had to come in. First the mechanics knew was I was coming in, and I was holding my helmet and pointing at it. And I think it was 39 seconds later I went out with a new one. Now the next race you just pushed a button and another one flipped up. And we got paper in the air intake, and which overheated the cars. The next race you just pulled a lever and it threw it out. And as long as you got out of the way of the paper, it didn't matter. But so they were fantastic people to drive for. And driving for teams like that, and I'm sure that it's like that with Williams and people now, except that they can tell exactly what you're doing, of course. You know about all this feedback to the pits. If you go in the pits in a Formula One thing, it's absolutely unbelievable. Every time they go past, in a fraction of a second, the car downloads all the information of lateral G and all the other things it gets around the course, and all the engineers are sitting there deciding what they're going to do. It's quite something. But I know you're not particularly interested in Formula One, but it is technically very interesting. And to me, it's another difference from when I started. When I started, there was a guy called John Heath. I started on 500s and things like that, but then when I was 19, I was offered a professional drive with a thing called an HWM. Now, an HWM was Hersham and Walton Motors, and this guy, John Heath and George Abacassis, decided to build a bits of this and bits of that, and he got an Alta engine, a 2-litre Alta engine running at 16-to-1 on alcohol, and it gave, I suppose, about 128 horsepower. We'd probably do 140 if we were lucky, and a pre-selected gearbox and so on, but it was a racing car, and it was painted in English green, and there were only two of us racing, Lance Macklin and myself. We go abroad and we race most weeks in Europe, and had a fantastic time. Now, when I think of that car and the bits and pieces, I mean, John Heath would go along and he'd take a standard Vanguard, which was one of the cars at the time, take the upright, and he would bodge it up and we'd buy special wheels and put on, and he'd buy something else on another car. And this really was a real bitzer. And you think of the modern cars, where even after practice, they take the stuff out and throw it away before a race. And when I consider how much those cars, I mean, we'd keep a thing on till it broke. And I remember once actually in Rome, the ruddy wheel came off. And John said to me, "Where is the wheel?" I said, "Well, I don't know. It went off in the side." He said, "Well, this was in practice." And he said, "Well, we better go and find it. Those Brani wheels are, they're 200 or 300 quid. So, and of course, when you lose the wheel, you lose the brake as well. You understand that. So that had gone as well. So we went round and we came to this place. We found where it had gone, and said to the man, "Please, senor, could we have our wheel back?" He said, "Well, when you finish rebuilding my wall, you can have the ruddy wheel." So you have to be a stonemason as well. But racing was quite different in those days, and there was a lot of fun, and it was very much more akin to the time we've had here, actually. I mean, much more social, more serious, obviously, but it was quite different to Formula One now. I think this circuit, I would put as one of the better circuits, I must say. We're here at Laguna. The old one was more demanding because it had the fast corners, but I think this one, which isn't quite as demanding, it's still quite tricky. And as I found out today, and I really felt today that I think I did a fairly good job in the Sprite. I don't think I did a very good job in the Lotuses. Thank you. I wish I could reverse that and say I think I did a good job in my Lotus. I don't think I did, actually. You see, the thing about the Sprite is it's a very rewarding car to drive. It goes like hell for what it is. I mean, it's under 1,000 cc's, and it really does go like hell. It's a car that one needs to get more and more confidence. I mean, my confidence was more or less back with it because it is so good, and you can throw it around and so on. And I made actually when the Morgan got past me. It was over the back. I can't remember whether there was a car in the way or whatever. Anyway, I couldn't stop it. And then we coming down, and I had quite a comfortable second. And I thought coming in on the last lap, it was only one thing either way. I mean, there's a great saying in motor racing: show me a man who's second, I'll show you a loser. So I thought, well, I was second now. Who the hell needs it? So I thought, well, I'll try and get first. And the only way I could get first actually was to go alongside the guy into the last corner on his right, because he was coming out on the left. And I reckoned I could get alongside him, and then he'd see me and say, "My God, I better watch out," and lift off. off and I'd be through. Well, unfortunately, he didn't. He didn't see me. He didn't look, and he didn't back off, and so I had to pull over. So he won the game, and I got third. You know, but it was. I think it was a good race. I enjoyed it, and I think he drove a good race. And I think the fact that he didn't look and see me was unfortunate. I mean, I don't blame him for it or anything else, because it's just one of those things. It's what they call a racing accident, and I came out badly, a racing incident, if you like. And I was the one who didn't win. It was a do or die thing at the last. And of course, that blasted Porsche came past as well. That was adding insult to injury. But there you are. They're two cars that I don't feel too badly having been beaten by them. So I enjoyed it though. Cars, to me, are animate. When you take a car, and I think this is the thing, when I take a racing car or a car and drive it hard into a corner, it sends a message. A car will let you know when it's getting near its limit of adhesion on the steering. It'll tell you, and there are ways that you can increase the steering, and that sort of thing. And I think that once you can start to understand the message the car is giving you, then I think you're beginning to get into the racing sort of scene rather than just driving fast. If you drive, this is why I don't think you can really drive really quickly on the road, not in the same way as you can in the race. Because when you start getting a racing car and you start driving the thing fast, you then the steering is used to, I always think you use the steering to direct the car. You say, listen, we're going to go left or we're going to go right. And once you've done that, you then give the car its message, its instructions through the throttle. You start steering on the throttle, and I'm sure most of you here know what I'm talking about. You come into a corner. The only problem is it doesn't always do the same thing. You can go, it's the same thing, you know, you can put your brakes on, you can get oversteer, you can get understeer. You can put the throttle down and you can get oversteer and sometimes understeer. And it's a case of knowing when it's going to be which and how to make it turn it to the one you want rather than the other way. And I think that the car gives you a message to say, look, now if you do that, I will do this for you. And if you at another time, it'll do another thing. And I think that is, to me, is the fascinating thing about driving, is that all cars, and this is why I was saying to you, all cars have a story to tell and a message to give. And I think that the cars of today, now I'm not sufficiently experienced on slicks, so I don't know how it works on those. But on treaded tires, to me, to drive one car or another wasn't too difficult. 61 Monaco was great, as I mentioned what I did before. I mentioned the great thing about it, I suppose, was that the Ferraris, I did not know until the very end that I was going to win. I really thought the Ferraris were pissing me about, quite honestly, because I could see them just across where you come down to the hairpins, you see, because they're only 2 or 3, 4 seconds behind, and they were just across there. I mean, we're talking of, you know, 15 yards away, and one lap it would be Richie Ginther, the next lap it would be Phil Hill. And I thought, well, you know, these buggers are just playing around because they don't want to get bored. And you know, it sounds funny now, but I can tell you at the time when you're going, like, I mean, every lap I'd start with this car and I'd say, now let's try and do a perfect lap. Now 14 corners and God knows how many gear changes, and it's not really possible to do a perfect lap. You go on, and then suddenly you think, Christ, I've left the 6 inches I could have used there, or I should have been closer here. You say, right, let's start from here to do a perfect lap, because that keeps you on your, you know, on the ball, and you're watching the instruments and that sort of thing. And every time I kept on saying, right, let's try another, now let's go again. And every time this would happen, I'd look across, right, one might be a little bit half a second behind, and then he'd be half a second down. And it was, you know, that doesn't give you much confidence, I can tell you. I was very pleased to see the checkered flag, I can tell you that. I think that to get to the ultimate, you've got to pare things down to the minimum. I think that it's up to the engineers to know how far you should go. I think sometimes the cars were overstressed. I think that sometimes maybe designers don't realize how much stress a driver can put a vehicle through, you know, given certain circumstances. But having said that, I do think that one's obviously, you've got to consider the driver's safety up to a point. And I think we as drivers have to understand that we are at the sharp end, and when you're testing something, that something may happen. And I know I've had, I think, 8 brake failures and seven wheels come off in my life, and twice the steering shear. And I can tell you every one of those frightened the hell out of me. And it frightens you. It's something when you go to the next race, if a wheel's come off in one race and then you go to the next one is lined with trees, I can tell you that when you go down those trees, you've got to concentrate on something other than what might happen. It's very much a driver's a requirement of a driver is to have great concentration, and quite a lot of the time the concentration has to be keeping your mind off the things that are easier to think about. What would happen if a wheel came off this week and I'm here? Any more? Can we go home? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. And on the amazing thing here, this is one of the few in America that's got my name spelled correctly. And thank you very much. Just remember, there's no value to my name, but it's terribly embarrassing when somebody comes along and presents you with this and they spell the name wrong. What the hell do you do? It isn't wrong, it's right, and thank you very much.
Just a final words of closing. You know, we're here because of the genius and the enthusiasm and the foresight of one man. We're sort of custodians of his cars. When we're gone, the cars will be there, but the family's still here, at least the bulk of it anyway. And if we could ask Hazel, please, and Clive to come up just for a moment, if you would. This is an original frame print of the 22nd annual Monterey Historic Races for the Chapman family, with our compliments and our thanks.
Thank you very much.
I guess I ought to, yeah. I wasn't expecting to have to say anything this evening at all, but we have had a really great time so far, and having seen everybody else speaking, hopefully I'm talking close enough to the microphone so you can hear. Today I had a really enjoyable time. For myself and Mum, it's been a weekend of firsts. It's the first time we've managed to get her out of her garden for a long, long time to come to something like this. And first time that Lotus has been honoured in this way at a big international historic festival. And the way that you've supported it is really fantastic. First time round Laguna Seca for me today in a Lotus Elan with Chris Locke. And first time driving an Elan as well, which was a big adventure. I hope you don't mind my hill start, Chris, which was a little bit dodgy. Whoever was in the green elite behind us, I'm very sorry. All the cars here over the weekend are a tremendous tribute to Lotus and to Dad's achievements and to everybody involved with the Lotus story. And in particular, the Indy cars were really special for me to see those. And I haven't been to the race at Indy, but I've been to the circuit. And just walking through the pits and imagining my father, just a few years older than myself, coming over to America and winning the Indianapolis 500 is just something so special. And to see those cars really brings it home to you. And it's really the pinnacle, maybe, of the Lotus adventure. And thanks for all your help in celebrating it with us. Thank you very much.